Hi, Kate here. Thanks for joining me. This is the second video that is part of the series I'm doing to support this pattern and some of the techniques that are used in it. This one is going to be on adding the afterthought heel. So this part here is on setting it up, and then there will be a bit of a break, and I will come back afterwards, and there'll be a second one on picking up the stitches and going from there. So this is really on how to get it set up and make sure that it works with the pattern. So with this one, this is the end of my 3 repeats for the pattern. So this is where my pattern round ends. You can see the things are a little bit odd. I haven't worried about doing any slip stitches or anything to avoid these funny jogs in this because it's a stocking, it's going to be folded and pressed at this edge, and you're not really going to see it. So I didn't really think that was worth it. Besides, I actually really like this kind of swirly thing that it does on the edge. But because of that, it means we want to center this in the back of the heel, because otherwise this would be visible on the side somewhere on either the front or the back. So the first thing that I'm going to do is the pattern repeats are 28 stitches, so I'm going to go out and mark where the end of the first pattern repeat is. And because I know where it's at, I should be able to guess it. And I'm going to mark it 28 stitches this way, and then 28 stitches back this way. And I will double check the ones going this way, because the next thing that I will be doing is slipping it. So I want half of the stitches for the heel. You could do them a little bit less, but I just like the simplicity of working with half the stitches. So what I do is I leave this one in place because I am going to come back and work the rounds again from the same place. And I am going to leave these for now, but I will end up cutting these. Actually, I might as well cut them now. So I'm going to cut those. And you could work them in now, or you can weave them in later. It doesn't really matter, but because the heel is going to end up opening up right here, if I leave these attached and I keep knitting, I'm not going to be able to cut my heel. So I need to leave these done and out of the way. So then we slip these 28 stitches, and I find slipping them easier to do this way. So we're just going to slip 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 26, 27, 28. Woohoo! We're just going to slip that because this is now means we can work across what are going to be the heel stitches. So the first step in the afterthought heel is to basically create the space where we're going to be able to insert the heel later, which is where it's the afterthought, because we're not knitting it in. If I was doing a normal heel for a sock, not an afterthought one, I would actually work half the stitches, the heel in right now, and then I would pick up and keep going. For this particular pattern, we're going to be adding some edging and some other things to the heel, and using a different kind of heel, so I prefer to just use it as an afterthought one. So I have my bit of scrap yarn here. This is just some like acrylic I happen to have kicking around. I like to use a yarn that is thicker than my normal yarn. It makes it a little bit easier for picking the stitches up. And I know this is the right length because I've already made this pattern and this was how much I needed the last time. So all I'm going to do is give it a little bit of a tail. It doesn't need a long one, you just don't want the stitches pulling out. And just knit across all of the stitches. So we're going to knit these 28 that we just slipped, and then we're going to knit the first 28 past the initial start of the round, so that the start of the round is still centered in the back of the heel. So that's my knit across. First marker. You're going to end up needing to pull a little bit tight on these last couple of stitches because they're the last two with that yarn that we cut. So just give them a little bit of a tug. And then normally if this was regular knitting, I would knit these in as I went, but because I'm pulling out the white, knitting it in doesn't really help because I'd just be pulling it out when I got there again. So now I'm going to knit the next 28 stitches, which should be up to that other marker. So we're at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 14. 27 and 28. So that was, so I'm right to where I needed to be. So I knew in the pattern where it needed to be. If you were knitting it and you weren't as comfortable with where in the pattern it was supposed to be, just count forward 28 and backward 28 from your start of the row marker, place your marker, and then knit between those two. So now what I need to do is slip the initially worked stitches back for the first half. So initially worked probably isn't the best way to put it. So the stitches between the center marker and the second marker, in this case my orange one, I need to slip those back on so that I'm back to the beginning of my row, and then I'm going to continue working in my leg chart for the foot for another 2 repeats, and then it will be time to finish up the toe and then come back to this. I do this as the last piece because it allows me to knit basically one big tube for the stocking, finish that off, and then come back and deal with this part. So we're going to slip these back, and then I will start, I'll reattach and start knitting and show you what that looks like, and then that will be the beginning of the Afterthought heel, and there will be quite a ways of knitting before it's time to come back and deal with it again. So there will be another video that will be part 2 of the Afterthought heel, which will be picking up the stitches, but for now what we're doing is just getting comfortable with getting it started and working forward from it. So we're almost back. Those 2 side markers really are just going to come out. They're only used right here just to make that easy so you're not having to constantly count. Realistically, you don't need them if you're comfortable keeping track of where you're at in the pattern or how many stitches you have without having them. But basically we are back now here, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick up knitting again as if these didn't exist, because in reality they don't exist. They're going to be something completely different, and on the front, the part that doesn't have the sort of the other 2 half the stitches, we're just going to keep doing what we were already doing. There'll be no break. On this side there will be this, just this thin white line that will be pulled out later on. So first things we're going to do, again we're going to have more yarn that's added, so I'm just going to put it kind of there, and then we're picking up from where we were in the pattern, which means I need one of these first. Just do that, perfect. And you. And again, if you're used to reading it, it might be a little bit awkward to read the stitches because you now have this white in there, so using a contrasting color that doesn't match either of your other colors might be better. It's also, the sun's starting to set here, so the lighting's a little bit not necessarily as bright as I might have liked it for doing this. I would definitely recommend having some nice good sunlight or strong interior light when you go to pull the stitches out, especially if you're doing what I'm doing here, which is a color that doesn't have terribly strong contrast from one of your other colors. So we're getting back. So we're almost, in this case, we're almost back here too. We're here to the end, so I would just give this a tug so that it doesn't loosen up any other stitches, and just ditch that extra stitch marker. We don't need it. And then we're just continuing, so make sure that this doesn't get wrapped up as a tail in your yarn. You don't want to knit that in because it's coming out. So stay back there. So we just keep going on here now, just like we were doing before. And keep working the pattern. So what will happen here is this will keep going around, and we'll just keep going again. So what you can see, how well you can see it here, is, and this is probably the easiest place to see it because there's a little bit of contrast between the section that doesn't have the Afterthought heel and the part that does. You can see there's a little bit of this extra white line that kind of goes through there. That's where we're going to pick up stitches and where we're going to get rid of this yarn later. On the front of the sock, the top of what would be sort of the top of the foot if it was a real sock, doesn't have any of that. So we're just going to keep going, and what we do is complete the pattern repeats and finish off the toe part, and then we'll come back and deal with this. So if you have any questions about this part of the process, please let me know in the comments. If you stay tuned. There will be another video once I get back to that part in the knitting where we'll talk about picking up the stitches, how to take out the white yarn, and what you need to keep an eye on for when you're knitting up your first row, because it gets a little bit tricky with the stranding. So thanks very much for joining me, and talk to you next time.